Hi, everyone. My name is Zoha. I'm an attorney at Palestine Legal, and I'm really happy to introduce the panelists who are participating in this webinar. I'm really happy that you're joining us. So the first person speaking is going to be Chip Gibbons, who is the Policy Director at Defending Rights in Dissent, and he authored the report, Still Spying on Dissent, the Enduring Legacy of FBI First Amendment Abuse, which he's holding up very helpfully right now. His expose of the FBI's investigations of Palestine solidarity activists was recently published by The Intercept, and that's why we're all here. So Chip will be going first, and then we'll hear from Huwaida Arraf, who is a Palestinian American activist and lawyer, and she's co-founder of the International Solidarity Movement, which was the group that was targeted by a lot of these investigations. The International Solidarity Movement focuses on grassroots community nonviolence organizing and resistance to the Israeli occupation. The organization has been twice nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And I am an attorney at Palestine Legal, where we provide legal support to activists throughout the United States who are facing repression because of their activism around Palestinian freedom and equality. So let's go ahead and get started.
Sure.
And, I apologize if I mispronounced people's names. I'm sorry.
You pronounced my name perfectly. You didn't call me Chris or Chad or Skip, which people can never believe I have a Chip as a name, so they just assume it's one of those other things, but it's not. Thank you everyone for joining. Over the weekend, The Intercept published an article by me about the FBI's repeated terrorism investigations into the International Solidarity Movement, which is a nonviolent movement opposed to Israeli occupation. In spite of the fact that the FBI opened up multiple investigations involving the national headquarters, over a dozen field offices, state and local police, JTTF. In one of the documents, they're briefing the California Highway Patrol, even though they used physical surveillance, confidential informants, a disgraced FBI unit called the Communications Analysis Unit, which has repeatedly gotten in trouble for pulling phone records without proper authorization. In one particularly scathing OIG report, the Inspector General found that this unit had employees from the telecom companies in the FBI office space with them, and the employees were letting them take a sneak peek at phone records they did not have subpoenas for, which is why you don't let telecom companies share open air office space with the FBI. I could have told them that, but I usually don't get solicited for opinions within the FBI. And in spite of all of that, they found absolutely nothing in two of the so there's two main investigations we were able to trace. I don't think there's only two investigations into the ISM. A lot of the documents are heavily redacted, but there were two major investigations that I was able to make sense of. One was based in St. Louis, and it followed two ISM activists who had returned from the occupied territories. During their time in the occupied territories, one of the activists was injured by the IDF during a protest against the sort of wall that that Israel is building in the occupied Palestinian territories that was declared illegal by the International Court of Justice. And another member of the delegation, who was a Holocaust survivor, was subjected to an extremely humiliating search, exiting Israel, not coming in, exiting. So no other purpose but to humiliate. Instead of looking at these deprivations of the rights of Americans, the FBI, after talking to a source of unknown reliability, chose to assess the two activists for connections to terrorism. They pulled their phone record, they pulled one of their phone records, and they ran it against a highly classified CIA cable, which was so classified the FBI wasn't even allowed to look at it, and claimed some sort of link between the phone records and that. But in spite of all of that, their conclusion was the two activists did not break any US laws, did not threaten national security, and were merely engaged in activism. And I want to stress that, we see a lot of these types of political investigations a lot. They very seldom result in absolute affirmative exonerations. That's very rare language to find in an FBI document. So that is astonishing. The other investigation, major one, was based out of the Los Angeles office with the approval of the national headquarters. They had a coordinating meeting at the national headquarters, and it investigated as domestic terrorism, the ISM as a quote unquote terrorist enterprise. 6 months into the investigation, they finally cite for the first time, excuse me, I'm a little bit thirsty. They finally cite for the first time that One of the laws they're looking at is the Neutrality Act of 1794, which is a very old law. It's still on the book. It still refers to foreign princes and dominions the US is not at war with. That's how old it is. And it's controversially been very unneutrally enforced, right? Like Robert F. Kennedy was asked why the Bay of Pigs invasion, which was literal army invading a country, didn't violate the Neutrality Act. And he gave this bizarre speech where he said, oh, it doesn't prevent you from fighting for a cause in which you believe in. Similar US individual support for the Contras, who tried to overthrow the Nicaraguan government by doing such pleasant things as attacking adult literacy centers, healthcare clinics, etc. That didn't violate the Neutrality Act, but nonviolent activity against military occupation, for some reason the FBI thought could violate the Neutrality Act. Once again, found nothing. The documents are extraordinarily shocking because they make blatant criminalizations of political speech. They claim that because ISM members have anti-capitalist and anti-globe philosophy, I believe anti-globe philosophy means anti-globalization, not flat earth society, but with the FBI, we never know. And they had sympathetic views of the Palestinian cause. They could be coerced into supporting terrorism. So that's blanketly criminalizing people who oppose the World Bank, people who oppose neoliberalism, people who oppose capitalism, and people who think the Palestinians have basic human rights because the FBI thinks if you somehow have those views, you could do something bad, right? That's blatant criminalization of clearly First Amendment protected activity. Sprawling investigation, turned up nothing. And I will say this, that as someone who wrote an entire report on the problem of FBI First Amendment abuse, I say this a lot, and it's sort of cliche, but it's true. You know, these types of files are shocking, but they're not surprising. The FBI has a long history of using its intelligence powers to spy on dissent. The first major intelligence unit in the FBI was found, or their predecessor, the Bureau of Investigation, was founded right after World War I with J. Edgar Hoover as its head. It was initially called the Radical Division, obviously to spy on radicals, and later became the General Intelligence Division. So this is very much hardwired into the DNA of the FBI, but nonetheless, the content of these documents is appalling. And that's what I have to say.
Huwaida?
Well, Chip laid it out very nicely as to the problem with this thing, with what the FBI has been doing. And was speaking as someone who was with an organization that was targeted and was individually targeted, I could say it's extremely disappointing and frustrating, because specifically the ISM, for years, we have been very clear about what our intention is, who we are, what we're doing, and why, the ideals that we're fighting for, and how we are fighting for them. One of the things that we were doing in the occupied Palestinian territory, for example, is trying to stop military attacks on civilians. And sometimes we would put international civilians, Americans, in cities, in homes with Palestinian civilians that were being targeted by the Israeli military. And when we did that, I mean, in order to generate any kind of effect, we had to let the media and governments know. So the people that were in the homes with Palestinians that were being attacked, that their homes were being attacked, were usually on the phone with the American consul, American embassy, saying, hey, I'm here and this is what I'm seeing. So we were maintaining this kind of line of communication so that the American government would know what we're doing and why. And, you know, more importantly, for our ultimate purpose of stopping Israel's military attacks and changing policy, is, you know, trying to push the American oppressor, the American government, into doing something. And therefore, the fact that the activists that were doing this in a lot of situations, putting their lives on the line to stand up for the ideals that this country claims to stand for, but doesn't, and actually supports policies that are in direct contrast with, you know, with what we say, you know, the government invests its resources and taxpayer dollars into investigating, again, these nonviolent activists, and not the policies that hurt American citizens or that put American citizens in harm's way, and that really trample on America's reputation around the globe. just personally, what happened to me is much later, actually, which is kind of surprising, because the what you covered, Chip, was focused on some of the earlier investigations. I had the FBI come to my door in 2013, and this was years after the International Solidarity Movement was founded in 2001. So we're looking at 12 years after we have been very active. And they come to my door just wanting to talk to me. Luckily, I wasn't home, but I got the message. And being the kind of knowing who we are and knowing we're doing nothing wrong, I'm like, sure, I'll talk to them. I have nothing to hide. But on the very wise advice of Palestine Legal, I did not volunteer to talk to them, and I did contact an attorney. And so anyone listening should know never to do that. Even though I was an attorney and had been engaged in this kind of stuff for a very long time, it was a very wise thing that I did not talk to the FBI on my own. And when they were contacted by the attorney who represented me, they said exactly what kind of Chip put forth, in that they were following up on complaints made against the ISM, and a little more probing elicited the information that the source of these complaints was really not credible at all. And my question is, okay, we know this person and the source has been making these wild accusations for like 8 years now. Why are you following? They're like, oh, we're a little bit behind. But so they were following up, many, many years later. Again, it's infuriating. I think all Americans should be infuriated, not just about the policy and how just utterly anti-democratic and anti-constitutional rights it is, and what a violation it is to Americans, the constitutional rights of Americans, but the fact that so many of our resources, so much money is spent on such nonsense.
Thanks so much for that. I am going to just share a couple of minutes of context, and then I think we'll probably wrap up, if that makes sense. So, I just wanted to say that, this egregious story that is shared here is something that everyone needs to read about. I think it's people really need to understand what is going on, and we really need to shed some light about these blatant abuses of our system. But these situations are not unique for Palestine activists, and not unique for activists in general. These, as Chip explained, this has been going on for decades. These same tactics have been used against the civil rights movement, against the Black Panthers, against Black Lives Matter today. The same tactics are being used against people who are trying to demand freedom and equality for Indigenous peoples in the United States as well. Even amid this crisis, when we're all in lockdown trying to protect our health, states around the country are passing anti-protest legislation that is creating really extreme penalties for people who are trying to protest pipelines that are causing environmental and other types of harm in their communities. And I think it's just very important for us to collectively be aware of this. I think one thing that I noticed in Chip's piece is that the FBI is extremely interested in solidarity groups, not just the international solidarity movements, but especially where there are interconnections between ISM solidarity activists and other groups that are active in the United States and active around the world in demanding freedom, justice, and equality for all peoples, not just people in Palestine. One extreme example of this that we saw was in 2010, when the FBI infiltrated anti-war groups throughout the Midwest, and there were simultaneous raids around the country. 23 anti-war activists were called in for a grand jury subpoena, and they were told that they had needed to testify in this space where they don't have access to an attorney. There's no one on their side. They can't plead the Fifth Amendment. They're just required to testify, or face years in jail. And it was very important for those folks to speak out and for their supporters to speak out and to explain to everyone what was going on. And in that moment, those 23 people that were subpoenaed and could have faced months in jail actually did not end up facing months in jail. And they did not end up having to testify to the grand jury because there was so much of an outpouring of support among grassroots activists, among prominent politicians, demanding that the FBI drop this baseless investigation that was grounded in essentially spying and infiltration of their group that really did not reveal any type of wrongdoing. And I think that is a good example of the importance of people power, both in knowing your rights and demanding them, and in speaking out about these issues. I think that this is a very scary environment as these types of incidents continue to take place, and we see sometimes they are getting exacerbated under the Trump administration. But we have to know that we have the power to resist this, and the way that we can resist this is by continuing to speak out for all of us across these movements for justice and freedom and equality. I think that's all I wanted to share. Anything else we should speak to?
Just as a final thing, I would point out that part of the FBI's basis for the investigation in these documents were extremely biased right-wing sources that contained information that directly contradicted State Department reports. So the FBI does rely on biased right-wing sources. In their infamous investigation in the 80s of Central American solidarity activists, the predicating event was a John Birch Society article. So the FBI definitely looks at right-wing and fringe stuff and treats it as fact.
And I think I would just say that, or end with, the importance of not allowing these investigations to do, I think, what they're ultimately intended to do, and that is to scare us into silence. And so, as you mentioned, Zoha, the speaking out and the solidarity is extremely important. And if so, any activists listening to this, or anyone that we know feels like they're targeted, they're being harassed. Not that I want to put more work on Palestine Legal, but there are resources. There's Palestine Legal. There are solidarity.
Please call.
And activists around the country, and we're stronger together. And only by banding together and not letting them scare us into silence will we, end up victorious against these tactics for, now and for their future use.
And if I could just add one last thing, even though these types of repression have been taking place for years, and if we had more time, I'd love to talk about the targeting of Palestinian activists in the 80s that carried on for over 2 decades. But we don't have that much time. And so I encourage people to read up more about these types of repression. You can find out about it on our website. But what I think is really important is that, even though this type of repression, and even though there is such a one-sided and threatening environment here for activists, we've seen Palestinian rights activism become more mainstream. And I think that as long as we continue to persevere, we will win. And I think it's very important for people to understand that despite the fact that this repression is taking place, there are people here to support you, and it is having an impact. It's making a difference.
Exactly. Thank you for hosting this and for your piece, Chip.
Thank you.
Thank you.